Showcasing local talent, professionals, and everyday people making Salt Lake City what it is today. It's time for another episode of the I Am Salt Lake podcast.
Welcome to episode 195 of the I Am Salt Lake podcast. I'm your host. My name is Chris Hollifield. Thank you so much for checking the show out, giving it a listen however you got here. Hey, the website for the podcast is iamsaltlake.com. It's where you can go and find all the episodes. You can find out more about me, find out more about the podcast. You can donate to the podcast right there on the website. You can also connect on iTunes or Stitcher Radio. iamsaltlake.com. Go check it out if you got a minute. This episode, I sat down with Barbara Barlow and Virginia Webb, two sisters. They grew up in a polygamist family right here in Utah. They wrote a fascinating book called 17 Sisters Tell Their Story. You can purchase it now on Amazon or at Sam Weller's Bookstore here in Salt Lake City. We had a great conversation. We found out about what it was like growing up for them in a polygamist household, what it was like with their father, served 2 sentences in the Utah State Prison, found out what it was like putting this book together. I'm going to be playing that here in just a minute. Really great conversation, so you're going to want to stay tuned for that. All the show notes can be found for this episode at iamsaltlake.com/195. Of course, have to mention our sponsors, Club 50 West, located right in downtown Salt Lake City at 50 West Broadway, right underneath the Broadway Media Towers. You can find them online at 50westslc.com. It's where you can go and find a complete lineup of all the comedy, all the music, all the things that they have going on. They've been doing some really cool things. I mean, just yesterday, they had a nerd flea market. A really cool event. A few weeks ago, they did my live show there, and I'm going to be doing another live show at 50 West. So go support them. Let them know you heard about them on I Am Salt Lake, and connect with them on Facebook and Twitter and all that good stuff. Also want to tell you guys about Lyft. I'm sure you've heard of Lyft by now. It's a great alternative form of transportation to get around Salt Lake City if you want to avoid any parking messes, if you want to avoid a DUI. Maybe your car even broke down and you need to get to work. Anyway, go to the App Store on your smartphone, download the Lyft app. It's LYFT for Lyft. Enter in the promo code IAMSaltLake. It's going to give you $5 off of 10 rides. Unfortunately, this is for first-time users only. So if you've never used it, enter in the promo code IAMSaltLake. It's going to give you $5 off of 10 rides. Also want to thank Melissa over at Best Friends. I got a new member of my family. I've officially become a cat dad. Just last Tuesday, I adopted a Sphinx cat. Beautiful cat. Charles the cat. I want to thank her for helping me out with this. You know, about a month ago, I dropped her a message. I said, hey, I'm looking for a Sphinx cat. If you ever see any come through the shelters, let me know. And lo and behold, one came through. And this guy is amazing. Charles the Sphinx cat. I'm sure you've seen some photos. I've already become that guy and posted photos all over Facebook of this awesome cat. So many thanks to Melissa from over at Best Friends. Like I said, this episode, I sat down and chatted with Barbara Barlow and Virginia Webb. We sat down at the American Musicians Radio Studio right here in Salt Lake City. So I'm going to quit talking, and why don't you guys join me as I jump into that conversation that we recorded at the AMR Studios right here in Salt Lake City, Utah. This is going to kind of be maybe a strange question right off the bat, but did you both share the same mother?
Yes, we did.
Okay, so you both shared the same mother.
Yes.
Virginia's older than Babs, just to get a little history. You know, I read the book to follow the timeline a little bit. It's like, okay, you know, so it started the oldest to the youngest, and there was a few parts where it's like, okay, this one had the same mother and you know, and this and that. And
yeah, trying to figure out which mother each girl belonged to would be a challenge, probably.
Was that tough for you growing up even?
No.
You knew who?
We always knew who our mother was.
You knew who your mother was. Mm-hmm. What was the inspiration for the book? What was the main idea? Like, talk about that.
Every once in a while, the sisters do a retreat, and as many as can come to it, or as many as want to. And we were at a retreat in St. George about, 3.5 years ago. And Barbara didn't happen to make it to that one, but I did. And as I was sitting there listening and thinking about my sisters, I realized how different all of us are, and how really quite remarkable things that we had gone through and had survived. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun if we all wrote our own little story and put it in one book? Wouldn't that be fun? And I love to write. So I asked the sisters, and I proceeded to talk them into, bribe, threaten, whatever, go. Some of them were writers like Barbara, but not all of them were. So some of them I had to go to their homes and get them to tell me their story. Then I would write it down, type it up, take it back to them, let them go over it. So it was quite an effort to get them to do it, but they all really were on board with it. They all wanted to do it. And so then about, a year and a half into it, it had drained me emotionally, and I was ready to just chuck it. And Barbara found out how I was feeling, because learning all the things that my sisters had dealt with was really hard for me. And because there's definitely a lot of love there. And so Barbara found out that it was draining me. And so she offered to pick it up and try and get it published. And I just dumped it on her. So without her, it took another year and a half didn't it?
Yeah.
It took a long time.
So when it was dumped on you, Babs, was everything written already, or were you still collecting stories at that point? Or?
She had all the stories. She had interviewed and had it all on paper, but we needed to find a flow to it. We need to find, how does this connect? Because, we tried to keep the personalities of each sister in the chapter. Yeah. Yet it needs to be readable. How does this, something that we can end the story with, or, who are we speaking to? What do we want to say to them?
Yeah, who's your audience?
Who's our audience? And what we both agree on is that if this book in some way can help somebody else by reading it, if it's, so many different women have had all these different experiences, even though they came from polygamy, somebody else that was not in polygamy might have lost a baby, or might have been abused, or those sorts of things. So that almost there's got to be a sister in there that just about anybody can relate to.
Absolutely.
Somebody's story in there. So that was our theme. That's our target, was what would touch people, and what would, and so then we had to do a lot of editing. We brought in a professional editor, and then we did more editing. We brought in different people at different points.
What's been the reaction so far from people? Have you had much feedback from people yet? Or, because I know it's pretty new, right? It's
very new. And most of it has been positive. There've been a couple of people that weren't real happy, but
were those family? But
they were family.
What weren't they happy about?
They didn't feel like their story was told exactly the way they expected it to be. But in conversation with them, I helped them to understand that this is a Reader's Digest version. If you want to tell your whole story, you write your own book.
Sure. And
so then they were okay with it. And there was one ex-husband who wasn't happy at all. But, divorce is hard, and you don't get divorced because everything was wonderful.
Absolutely. So, I've been there. I know exactly.
But I think the critical voices came from within our family. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Outside the family, we've had,
it's been very positive,
wonderful comments. People have really enjoyed it.
Well, I enjoyed it. I find Utah history to be so fascinating. And I don't know a whole lot about polygamy. You hear stories in the news or this and that, but to read about it firsthand, of experiences, or, even just to hear about some of the areas of Salt Lake back in the 50s or the 40s. And it was just very interesting, in my opinion.
And we tried to put, that's the chronological, it started out. When was Fran? Her story starts out in the 30s.
Yeah, 30s. Yeah, it even goes back further.
And that's what we wanted, was to have what was life like for her at that point, and how was that different than when I was growing up. And so you've got all these different time
what's the age span between the sisters? What's the
Fran's 87 right now. I think she's 87, and you're 60.
How many? So like 30 years, huh? Like between
of the living sisters.
The living sisters.
Yeah,
these are just the sisters that were still alive at the time of the book. We had more sisters,
but of the sisters that are in the book, the oldest one's 80 and the youngest one's 60. 87. The oldest one's 87 and the youngest one is 60.
Now, why? Okay, so 17 sisters. You actually refresh my memory. So 34 children altogether from your father.
Right.
And some died in childbirth.
Yeah.
And we counted those. So
what 17 sisters were those? Why did you just do sisters, not brothers? And you just figured that would be
good
too.
Question.
I mean, you just figured.
Very good question. But basically, the sisters were not supposed to have a voice. According, our father was the man, the male, the head of the house, the ruler.
They had the priesthood. We didn't.
He was the Lord and Master, and we were supposed to be his obedient. And his wives were supposed to be obedient to him. And so some men could, a lot of men believe that and still do, but they could do it with love.
Sure.
And our father did love us, but he also wanted total control of our mind, our body, whatever. And so
this was your opportunity to have your voice heard.
Right.
Yeah.
Sort of.
For the sisters to have a voice. This was about us.
Was it liberating to be able to write it on paper a little bit, to get it out there?
Actually,
how did you feel after putting it out there?
I think most of us received the voice before we ever did this, or we wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
I loved putting my story down. I loved being able to say everything that I ever wanted to say and put it in print. And then, I can let go of it. I can get beyond my story. That's what I love best about that.
Mm.
Now, did either one of you, because I know some of the family decided to continue polygamy. Neither one of you continued, right? For the sake of the recording. Right. Was that tough? Because I know how it is even for me. Ways you're raised where to not go with the normal of what your family does, it's kind of tough. And there's a part of you that feels maybe I should
like you don't belong.
You should have continued.
And we just happened to be, both of us did not choose polygamy. And there was an absolute difference in how we fit in the family because we didn't choose it, gaining the approval of our mother, or being one of the favored ones.
Talk about this. So did your mother she had an issue with you not?
It was a silent, it was very subtle, but it was whether you gained her approval or not. It was if you follow in her footsteps, then, you're on the A list. Uh-huh. And I chose to never ever live polygamy, consider polygamy.
Can I ask why? Or is that kind of a deep, loaded question?
Well, hopefully it's in the story.
Well, yeah.
But it's because
for the sake of the recording, I guess, yeah.
For the sake of the recording, I just never bought it.
Yeah.
I never bought into the story. I could not believe some of the things that went on and what I was expected to do and behave. I just was not capable of doing that. It was never honestly an option for me. I loved my parents, but I didn't trust their authority.
Yeah.
And their word.
Because I was talking with a coworker at my day job a little bit about polygamy recently, obviously leading up to this interview. And, really at the end of the day, it's hey, if a man wants to have a few wives, is it really that bad?
I think whatever you believe to be right for you and your family is one thing, but it has to be within the realm of not being abusive. In other words,
or forced on you.
So
did you see it that growing up with the women and whatnot? It was like, it's this way no matter what. You have to choose this.
Well, our father he absolutely believed what he was doing, and so did all three of the wives. They absolutely believed that what they were doing was the only way. So it wasn't like we were threatened if we didn't do it.
Sure.
It was like the coercion, the constant preaching, the constant, if you don't do this, you're not worthy, or if you do that, you'll never be forgiven. Some of those tactics that were used to brainwash. Basically, and I think there's many religions that do that. You know, we all know of people that believe a certain way that's kind of far out there, but the brainwashing that a parent is able to do with a child is huge. And so if that parent also withholds love, if the child doesn't do what the parent has taught, that's huge, because every child wants their parent to love them.
Sure.
And so in the process of growing up in a situation that eventually when you become an adult, you don't want to do that. It does take courage. It takes courage to say, no, that's okay for you, but I don't want to do that. And then to have the parents also treat you like a second-class citizen because you're not doing what they expect you to do.
Yeah. And for the sake of listeners, it's the office next door, their phone's ringing. Polygamists, a little bit of research I was doing, some of them practice different ideas and beliefs. I mean, especially with all that, there's TV shows now and stuff portraying polygamy. It was FLDS, right? That for the polygamists, when you were growing up, that was what you practiced, that kind of because there was still Mormonism or still Latter-day Saints. How does that work?
Well, the first polygamists, of course, started in the Mormon Church. Then the Mormon Church stopped living that way.
Yeah.
And then 20, 30 years down the road, there were a handful of men that decided that they were supposed to live that way in spite of the church. So they started doing it secretly.
Well, because wasn't it with Utah to become a state, they had to end polygamy, right? That was kind of the history of it.
Yeah.
But did you still practice the basic teachings of the Mormon Church?
Most polygamists continued to go to the Mormon Church, but just were living polygamy underground.
Sure.
But eventually they all left the church. But they still continued to teach basically the church doctrine. But eventually, you leave the church, you're teaching what you think is church doctrine, but pretty soon it becomes your own. Well,
because like in the book, there was talking of even drinking. And obviously the Latter-day Saint, the Mormon religion teaches the word of wisdom and abstinence from drinking.
Well, the Mormons didn't start out that way. There was,
Brigham Young had his, didn't he have a winery or something? And
the Mormons here were making wine
the Mormons weren't, they weren't that adamant about the quote word of wisdom until about the 40s.
Okay.
And so the polygamists were not that adamant about drinking.
I was just curious. I mean, I was reading the book and I was like, well, shoot, I guess I didn't realize that. Is any of did your family, are you connected with any of them like in Colorado City? Or?
We have one sister that lives down south.
Okay.
That's in the book.
Okay. Yeah. In the book.
She's in there.
And, I just didn't know, like, with everything.
And there's nieces and nephews down there. There is one niece that we know of that is in the FLDS church. And she has no contact with her family.
Her mother has not heard from her in years. Has not been allowed to speak to her.
Wow. Well, and it's like Babs had mentioned a few times. There's a lot of things in the book, and I can't urge people listening enough. Really, go pick up the book, and we'll I'll put links on the show notes, and we'll get into that. You're actually going to be doing a book signing. We'll mention that at the end, obviously, at Sam Weller Books at Trolley.
Yes, yeah.
We're
excited about that.
November 13th.
Right.
6 o'clock, you said? 6
Mm-hmm.
o'clock. Yeah. And a few of the sisters are going to be there, right? You two will be there.
More than us, yeah.
More than do you know who, or do you care to say, or do you want to, you're not uncertain?
A third sister is going to be, speaking with us. Her name is Linda.
Okay.
And then others will be there to sign. A few others.
Potentially. We're working on that. But so basically, I'm non-religious. Ginny is LDS. And then the third sister that will be there is in polygamy currently.
Oh, wow. So she still practices. So Colorado City, I was watching something, before the interview, I was watching some different segments, news segments on like YouTube and stuff. And from what I understand though, is if a polygamist from like that, if they go out and kind of talk to a news source, they get kind of shunned. Is that true or no? Is that, cause it's kind of frowned upon, right? Or
I think it depends on like, the Kingston group is like, don't talk to anybody at any time.
Sure.
Our father though, he's always been very open.
Okay.
You know, we did an interview with 2020 and BBC, back in the 80s. My dad was front and center. He loves his family, his entire family. He never, he was an independent. He wasn't part of any group because he was so independent and he did his own thing. So they could try and shun him, but it wouldn't work.
Did that make it tough though, if he wasn't afraid to kind of spotlight him a little bit and kind of make him a target? Cause I mean, obviously, polygamy.
Well, that's why he went to prison twice.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I guess we might as well go into that, lead into that, a perfect segue. And again, it talks about it in the book.
Once he went to prison, served the full term, they could no longer prosecute him. That's why he could be on BBC. He could talk to anybody at any time.
Why couldn't they prosecute him though?
Because he'd already served time for it. He served his sentence.
But if you keep breaking the law.
By the time he finished his 4 years in prison, the politicians realized that it cost them, I mean, they had to support all the wives and children while he was in there, plus the finances, plus the rest of the world were like, what are you doing this to him for? In other words, it was very negative publicity for Utah to arrest polygamists and just for polygamy. Now, if it was child abuse, like in the FLDS church, he's in prison for child abuse, that's a whole nother story. But if it's just a man living with 3 women and they all agree and it's their belief system.
I know friends that live with 3 girls, they shouldn't get arrested,
That was, my thinking in the 50s when he was arrested. How many men had all kinds of women around and children by other women? Nobody's prosecuting them.
Yeah.
So what is the big deal? And that's the publicity that Utah got when those last 5 men were arrested.
Talk about that. Do you remember, what was it? How did that happen? They come pound on the door, the police? And I mean, talk about that. I mean,
the first time it happened, I was only 4 and they did come pounding on the door at 5 o'clock in the morning.
And I'm sure that's still in your head.
It is.
I'm sure.
Absolutely. But the second time it happened, it was a lot more quiet and they went separately to 5 different men. And my dad, he had pulled out. He had been at his first wife's house. He was coming to our house. He pulled out on State Street and he was pulled over by the sheriff.
For what reason? For being a polygamist.
For being a polygamist. Mm-hmm.
That just seems against the law right there.
Well, see, today it couldn't happen. But then it was nobody, there was a lot of judgment in the 50s. And it was in the 50s. It was 1954, I think. And a lot of judgment, I don't know. Anyway, so they arrested him, but it was just one man, but it was on the front page. His picture was on the front page of the local section in the newspaper. And,
probably the Tribune
and the Deseret News. I personally was embarrassed. Us kids, the children were embarrassed and the other kids at school made fun of us.
What grade were you in?
I was a sophomore in high school at the time. And so I changed schools. The school I went to had maybe 3 polygamists going there, including me that I knew of. And I started going to a different high school where there were quite a few polygamists and they were accepted by the other students, basically.
Yeah.
So I was more comfortable there.
So when your neighbor, because obviously everybody around you wasn't polygamous, you said you were embarrassed.
I was embarrassed at school. I was embarrassed with my friends. it wasn't something you advertised. I dressed like everybody else dressed, and I wanted to be accepted, and having that happen,
So why do you think they targeted your dad then? Why do you think? Because he was vocal about it? Because, I mean, you said 5 people were arrested.
There were 5 men arrested, and those.
I mean, obviously there was more
the
than 5
second time.
polygamists, though.
Yeah, but those 5 men that were arrested were all men who let their plural wives, children, have their last name. So it was public knowledge.
There you go.
They would go to the schools, and they had records of them, and there were politicians that were trying to make a name for themselves.
The first arrest where they arrested, 18? First time they were all arrested, they released them with the agreement that they would not see their other women and children, keep just the first family. So some of the men moved out of the country, moved out of the state, or they made their families take a different last name, made them live someplace else, and pretended like, we have a sister that never saw daylight. Her and her children were not allowed outside because she was a multiple wife. She was not the first wife.
But why? Why? Because they didn't want people to know about her?
Right,
exactly.
Right. That he didn't want to go to prison. So she was always inside. She only came out at night, and her children were not allowed to play out in the yard until they built a huge high fence around their yard.
And our dad wouldn't do that. He was proud of us. He wanted to have his whole family together, all of his wives together.
And that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
I mean, you shouldn't have to hide. So how long did he serve? How long was he in prison for?
The first time only, I think 11 months. And that's when he signed a paper saying he wouldn't, that he wouldn't associate with the other 2 wives. But he never intended to live up to that. And in fact, he didn't. And his parole officer had said to him at one point, we don't care how you live. Just don't force your neighbors to deal with your lifestyle. Because with all 3 families in one home, which is what he had, the neighbors were all very aware and very angry. So he took the other 2 wives and put them in other homes. And so then he was okay for about 10 years. And then 10 years later, they arrested these 5 men.
What I found interesting in the book, what I enjoyed hearing, well, I guess I don't know if enjoyed would be the word, but it was the old prison up in Sugar House Park.
The first time.
And a lot of people don't even know the prison was there originally. So then the second time he was at
Point of the Mountain.
Point of the Mountain.
Mm-hmm. In fact, actually, he was one of the guys helping build the Point of the Mountain, build buildings there. He was one of the prisoners that they would ship out there to build it in 45 when he was in prison.
Did you go visit him in prison?
I remember visiting him once, but I was only like 5, so I don't remember that.
The first time.
Yeah, the first time.
But the second time?
Second time at the Point of the Mountain, yes.
Was that tough to visit him?
It was.
I mean, just seeing your dad behind bars.
It was.
Yeah. What about you? Do you remember it all, Babs, or no?
Yes, I do. I was, I think, 4 when he was arrested, imprisoned.
Yeah.
I remember being shamed, because they took the mug shots, but at the same time, it was the only opportunity to see him. And he treated us so special when we did come to see him. He just welcomed us and gave us special things. It just made us feel special. So it was something to really look forward to. It was a treat for us in some ways.
Backing up a little bit, you mentioned how you were embarrassed with your name, at school and stuff. Do you remember, like, at what age you're like, this isn't normal? This isn't, because I'm sure you thought it was normal at first, right?
I think I realized it wasn't normal gradually as I would talk to other people, my friends. I would talk to my friends, and I began to realize that what I was living wasn't normal. But it just didn't really hit me how abnormal it was until he did go to prison.
Yeah. And then you were, obviously you're a little bit younger. Did you kind of from the beginning know?
I did.
Wait a minute here. This isn't, my neighbors don't have, 3 moms and.
Well, then the thing is, our dad was gone a lot.
Yeah.
Before he was imprisoned. So from right after I was born, he got arrested, and then he was traveling, trying to make money to fight the charges and to keep out of prison. I didn't see him much then, and then he was in prison. So until I was 8, I didn't see him that much. By that time, I wasn't around polygamy. It was, I knew we had something a little bit different, but it didn't really come out until once my dad started, he was around and started trying to enforce certain things. And that's when it really felt different to me, where it was so obvious he was trying to make me do something that wasn't ever anything I wanted to do.
I think the huge difference between us and our perceptions is by the time she was growing up, there was a television in the house and she was seeing these series of what?
Leave It to Beaver, my three sons, and Donna Reed. And
none of them were polygamous.
Yeah, they had two parents and 2 or 3 children. And that's what I wanted.
And so, see, she had a different perception of what was real.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that. There was no television in our home. And so what I was living was real to me. And it was okay. I felt happy. I was one of Daddy's pets. So therefore I was never abused. And so it was normal to me. And I was convinced this Daddy that I adored was right.
Mm.
And so I intended to live that way.
You mentioned separate homes. Were there ever, they obviously weren't right by each other, or were they close by? So
they were all within Salt Lake City limits.
Because my question is was there ever a time when you had almost everybody kind of under one roof?
That happened until he was put in prison the first time in 1944, 45.
I mean, was that chaotic? I mean, all the kids and all the people under one roof. I mean, how did you even celebrate birthdays? I mean, or any of that? Was that tough? Or I don't know. I mean, did you just have like, okay, this is all everybody for December? I don't know. It just seems interesting to me because with that many siblings, I'm sure you just kind of got to the point where it's like, let's celebrate November birthdays right now.
Well,
I just find it interesting, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I think that birthdays weren't celebrated that much. It was, in other words, a birthday party would be the siblings your age having birthday cake and jello or whatever.
Sure.
Christmas was always celebrated. Our dad definitely tried to make sure we had a Christmas of some sort, but because you're poor, Christmas amounts to cookies, nuts, bananas, fruit, apples, and oranges
fruit was good
that we didn't always get to have.
But those were a treat, so those were special.
Those were special,
sure.
and we got little gifts, very little gifts, but usually things we needed, like new socks or a new dress or whatever.
And kids nowadays are so spoiled.
But basically the moms saw to it about the gifts. Our dad saw to it about the treats. But
you're talking about it in the book.
But the moms are the ones that saw to it that our birthdays were recognized and that Christmas was a time for us to receive certain gifts. And I think that was, when they were all living in the same house, that created some pretty good contention between the women. But once we were all in separate homes, then the women could do what they wanted without the comparisons, without the children comparing one with another.
What do you think the best part about being raised in a polygamous home is? I mean, there's got to be pluses and positives of it.
I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
So you loved it.
Because there was always somebody to talk to, always somebody to have fun with.
And to play with.
And there were a lot of people. I felt loved my whole life.
Yeah.
So that was the positive. There were a lot of people that always loved me. Even my older siblings, I always felt loved. But that wasn't the experience with every one of the kids, which...
In the book, 17 Sisters talks about, everybody's different, perception and growing up.
That's right.
So you felt pretty close, or
how did you feel about growing up in a polygamous home?
Yeah, I mean, Babs, let's
I think I might have already touched on that.
Sure.
But it was, by the time I was growing up, all the other kids were gone. There was just a few of us left. And there wasn't camaraderie. There was not friendship. There was not much fun.
By the time you came along, everybody was so worn out. They're like, I'm done with this.
Oh, yeah. The parents,
absolutely.
Mom was so done. I didn't learn to appreciate, what I appreciate about polygamy is the huge legacy, the family. I am really grateful now. It's like, who has this? All these sisters to choose from, all these brothers, who has a family like this that I can turn to? There's already always somebody there that if I need something, they know somebody or they know about something. You know, I've recently come back after 25 years out of Utah. I left Utah because that was a really difficult experience for me. And coming back,
So you kind of left to escape a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was not a place that I enjoyed. I didn't, the whole family dynamics, because I was such a black sheep. I was, I didn't feel approved of or liked very much. And I didn't join the LDS church. And so there, at that time, there wasn't a lot of places to fit in. So I lived outside where nobody knew me. Nobody knew where I came from. Nobody knew anything about polygamy.
Well, because that's one thing I learned, with the book and a little bit of research I did. The Barlow name is pretty well known in Utah.
Yes,
and so I could see why you felt I need to leave. I need to. Well, I mean, I experienced a little bit of the same thing when, I was late teens. I had to get out of Utah. I had to leave. I just couldn't be here anymore. And then you get older, you come back and you realize, okay, I can make my own path.
It's not so bad after all.
It isn't so bad here. Like now when people find out you were raised this way, I mean, what's the reaction like? Or is there much of any reaction?
It's usually curiosity.
Yeah.
And I tell people, in a conversation, something will come up and I say, yeah, I was raised in a polygamous family, and that's not a big deal this day and age.
No.
They're curious about what it was like, but I don't feel any disapproval. I don't feel any judgment from other people.
What about, so when you left from Utah, okay, so I'm sure, I mean, automatically, I think everybody outside of Utah, that's their first thought is polygamy. Oh,
Yeah.
where you have polygamy. What about you, Babs? I mean, did you share much with people outside of Utah that's the way you were raised, or did you kind of bury that for a little while?
I didn't bring it up unless it came up organically in a conversation. I would hear people say things like, just about Mormons. Oh, they have green horns out there. Like, especially in the, the 80s and 90s. And I'm like, do you really think they have green horns? Yeah. And they were just talking about LDS like that. And so I would not bring up polygamy much at all unless it was, somebody I trusted or I felt comfortable talking about it, and then I might open it.
What are some of questions people ask? What are some of the most common questions that people ask you about polygamy? I'm just curious.
Usually it's how the wives handled it. They want to know how the women handled it, because no woman in her right mind wants her husband to go sleeping with some other woman.
Yeah, well, that's the first
They're not
thought.
going to give them their approval. So that is the first question, is how did they handle that? And weren't they jealous? Absolutely, they were jealous.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There was jealousy. There was huge
competition.
Yeah.
What kind of competition? Like who's prettier or something, or how many nights did you get with him and stuff like that?
A little bit of all of that.
And so the status.
Yeah, status. And so the man has to be a master manipulator or whatever to maintain.
Or charmer.
To maintain the relationship with all the women.
Yeah, he's got to keep all the three women willing to stay with him and have another woman around. So he's got to be keeping each one of them happy to be with him.
That just seems so exhausting to me.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like,
no doubt.
I've been married before myself, and obviously had relationships, and I just couldn't imagine having multiples of those, It's just like, gosh.
How hard it is to keep one woman happy, right?
It's like, that just would be so.
Happy wife, happy life.
Yeah.
How about happy three wives, happy life? No, I'm sure it's hard. It's very, very hard. They have to believe what they're doing is right, or they wouldn't do it. They would end up leaving. And there are many times a woman will leave that situation because it's just too unbearable. So a man has to be pretty remarkable. And I think our father was very remarkable in his own way. He had his disastrous qualities, but he also had some really good qualities.
What do you think the biggest misconception about polygamy is? I mean, what do you think people, think might be one way, but it actually isn't, or I don't even know if that maybe there isn't anything. I don't know.
Well, one of the things is like, oh, you dress like I do. They expect people to look really different because of the images on TV or wherever they've seen. But you could see a polygamist could be walking down the street. You wouldn't even know it.
Well, what makes some polygamists dress a certain way then?
I think it's men wanting to control them.
Okay.
I think the men want to control the women and the children, and so they keep them different. They keep them in their little group so that they can control them. To me, the one group that's been in the forefront for how many years? 8 years now or more. Power and control is a huge issue. And what
group, just for sake of, people are even listening to my show outside of Utah.
The FLDS group.
Okay.
And Warren Jeffs is in prison for abuse. I think, my own opinion about it is that a pedophile used religion to gain access to many children.
Yeah.
And so that isn't really what all the polygamists are like. There are some really, really good people who live that way.
However, I think the line was crossed by the polygamous men, fathers.
Sure. Have either of you ever met Warren Jeffs?
No.
I'm just curious. Just curious.
No, his father,
You met his father?
Oh, yeah.
And I don't even know. I
wouldn't say I personally met him face to face, but he was a leader in the group, and I went to some of the meetings.
Yeah,
when I was a teenager.
And he ran it until Warren.
And he wasn't running it when I was a teenager, but he was one of the leaders, and eventually he was the leader.
I lightly mentioned at the beginning, like we see reality TV shows and, do you guys watch any of those? Do you?
I don't.
I was just curious, like how accurate some of those are. I was it Sister Wives or something? And they kind of liberal or a little more open-minded with things. It's like, okay, that's kind of an obscure image of polygamy.
I think it's a nice thing for TV.
Sure.
It's like any other.
Well, we do have a nephew that could be the model for a polygamous family. He's got 3 wives and they're all very
beautiful,
well-read,
well-dressed.
They have their own. One has a speaking thing that she does and motivational speaking. And they're very, very loving and giving to each other and open and, very kind. He's been on Sister Wives. He's got a book out, he's been out there a lot.
What's the name of his book, if you don't mind?
It's called, Love Times 3.
And what's that about polygamy?
It's his story.
Joe Darger.
Okay. Oh, okay. That's
our nephew.
Yeah. That's the reality show, right? Yeah.
No, he's not. No. He was a guest on that reality show.
Okay.
But anyway, he's a good guy.
Sure.
And his women are good women and they've got good kids.
And they do speak out for polygamy. That is what they choose to do very openly. They're out among society. They don't force their children into polygamy. They absolutely encourage them to think for themselves.
Yeah. How do financially? I know we're talking about like birthday. I mean, that just seems so expensive to get. I mean, how do they financially just?
Well,
however you could.
Well, and the book talks about during the Depression, they were trying to feed a large family instead of a small family.
Yeah.
But they did whatever they had to survive and whatever they could do. And of course, the teenagers, when they got jobs, gave their parents most of their money, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's at least one sister that talked about that they were she felt like they were starving. They really didn't have much to eat.
Yeah. But I think the whole country was in a depression then because after that, our dad always was a hard worker. He worked very hard. And he always had a job, but he very often got fired because they found out he was a polygamist. And in Utah, that was grounds to get fired. So then he would turn to selling and he was a good salesman. But he really couldn't make much money doing that. So he'd go back and get a job, but the women always were doing things.
Yeah.
Like tending children or ironing or whatever.
And the children are doing
And
things.
the children were always
They were selling newspapers.
participating,
They were tending, babysitting, whatever job they could get.
See, and I think that's amazing. You were kind of looking out for each other. You were a family, and I see families nowadays, and it's like, oh, I don't want nothing to do with them, and
Right.
but you tried to keep a family unit.
I think that to me is one of the blessings of growing up in a large family. You learn that things are not as important as we are each other. I mean, we are important to each other, and he who has the most things is not necessarily the most loved. But,
So are there Barlow family reunions now? What are those like? I mean, those must just be full.
we just had one.
We barely had one.
We used to, like when Dad was alive, we would have one for his birthday every year. We would get together. And then after he passed, the family did for a little while. And when I came back this year, then, we went ahead and put together the first one in 15 years.
Quite a while. It's been quite a while.
It's been a while.
Just, I would imagine it's just a lot of people. I mean, because if you had, again, 34 children, three women, 34 children, and then their offspring, and then offspring.
But the thing
She
is,
had
in something like that, you don't even get half of them to a reunion. Not even half.
Oh yeah, no, I know. I mean, even
but
when
it's
I've
still a
gone to my
huge
own
crowd.
family reunions, it's
there's like
pretty incredible.
130,
I only had
150
4
people.
of my children at this reunion.
Yeah, out of your 10.
So
11. Out of my 11.
You have 11 children.
I have 11,
yourself.
and only 4 of them came to this reunion, and none of my grandkids were there. Oh no, 5. I had another child show up with her 2 kids. So.
Did any of your children continue on to polygamy?
Oh no.
No. I'm just curious.
No, I wasn't. I didn't ever get into polygamy, and my children have thanked me. Several of my children have thanked me for getting out of it and raising them in the LDS church.
Okay. Well, I was just wondering, like, if that ever, say one stopped and then maybe, the grandchildren continued on.
No. In fact, my daughters who were, I have beautiful daughters, and there were young men in the polygamous culture who wanted to date them. And when my daughters would come and say how gorgeous these men were and be all impressed with how cute they were, I would say, well, they might be cute, but after you marry somebody like that, they will live polygamy. I don't care what they tell you today. After you're married, they will live polygamy. And so my daughters were like, okay, done. We don't want that.
But there are some sisters that their children have or do currently live polygamy.
Mm-hmm.
The second generation, I don't know if a third generation. I can't think.
I was
of
just
anybody.
curious how that worked. Like if with their parents stopped and then the grandkids and the great, which ones carried it on, or I guess it's all just different.
I'm sure it's all different, but most of the ones that didn't live that way of the sisters, their kids didn't.
Oh, absolutely not. And the ones who did, even a lot of their children, a lot of the next generation did not do it.
Right.
It took a lot of effort and control on the part of our parents, and they worked closely as a team and it was, I think, more our mothers' children lived polygamy than the other two because our mother was determined. And because of that approval thing, she was able to get more of her children into polygamy.
Any idea how many polygamists do you think there are here in Salt Lake City area? Any idea?
There's
Because you mentioned, you
thousands.
probably see them and you don't even know they are.
Right. That's right.
I mean, do you think there's hundreds of thousands or probably not that many, I guess, because...
Well, now that I think it's really diminishing the number of polygamists, maybe not down south. Down south, I think it's still pretty strong. Pretty strong,
yeah.
But here, I don't think it is.
Just curious.
It would be interesting to know because they have huge families.
Yeah.
And they absolutely believe what they're doing. But I think most of the polygamists today do not put the pressure on their children to live that way that our father did and that many of those older families did. I think without an exception, I think the families that are not, they teach their children to you better know that this is the right thing to do or don't do it. Because it's a very hard way to live. So if you don't believe that it's the right thing for you to do, don't do it. And that's what I've heard a lot of our siblings say.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, to get the book, obviously Sam Weller. If somebody's not able to go there, it's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon ebook, or you can order the physical book.
And is there a website that people can go to right now or no? I know there's a Facebook page.
There is a Facebook page,
which I will link. If you don't care, I'll link that up.
Absolutely. Please do. That's how they can contact us.
Sure.
Because that's what I've set up for that purpose.
So they can message through the Facebook, and then one of you two, or that
would
Babs,
be me.
Barbara, that will be the one responding there. Was that the easiest way if they wanted to reach out and get in touch with you at all?
There is an email address in the back of the book as well, but I think Facebook is easier.
Sure. Oh yeah, here we go. 17 Sisters Tell Their Story at gmail.com. And Sam Weller is going to be carrying the book.
They're stocking the book.
Is it available right now?
Yes, they have the book in stock right now.
Stock right now.
Huh.
And, obviously, believe it or not, there is people outside of Utah that even listen to this show. And for their access, they can go to Amazon, download it for the Kindle. Anything else you want to talk? I mean, I'm sure there's a million questions about polygamy and a million things I didn't even barely touch on. But I appreciate you sitting down and chatting a little bit about this.
I'd like to just say that of the 17 sisters, they only have two things in common, all 17 of them.
Which is what?
One is they all have the same father, and two, they all believe that a higher power brought them to the point they're at today. Either God or whatever, but a higher power brought them to the point they're at today. Otherwise, their lives are all very different.
And the book, really, honestly, I can't urge. It's a fantastic read. Going into it, I didn't really know, okay, well, what's this going to be about? And then as I started reading, I'm like, this is so fascinating. I love learning about other people's lives and their stories, and the opportunity to sit and chat and learn a little bit about, what it was like for you.
We really appreciate you having us come here.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Anything else you want to add before we finish recording here? Anything? I don't know. I think we kind of touched a little bit about it, and hopefully we intrigue people to go get the book. So.
Yeah. And we just hope that it, is a benefit to somebody, that it might help them in their lives. And that's really the purpose of the book, is how can that help you understand yourself a little bit better.
All right. Many thanks goes out to Barbara Barlow and Virginia Webb for coming on this episode of the podcast to talk about their book, 17 Sisters Tell Their Story, talk about what it was like to grow up in a polygamist family. Never had anything like this on the podcast before, so I was really, really excited when I got an email asking me if I'd be interested in the book, interested in chatting with them, and of course I jumped on it. So many thanks to both of them for taking some time out of their day and sitting down in the conversation. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I'd love to know your thoughts on this episode. Feel free to drop me an email at iamsaltlake@gmail.com. That will go directly to me, and I'd love to know your thoughts on this. I found it very interesting, as I really don't know a whole lot about polygamy. So this was a great conversation to kind of find out their story and find out what it was like being a polygamist here in Utah. Again, they're going to have a book signing November 13th at Sam Weller's Bookstore at Trolley Square, November 13th at 6 o'clock. Make sure you go check it out. Buy a copy of their book. Have them sign it, chat with them, let them know that you heard about them on I Am Salt Lake podcast. You can also get it on Amazon. I'll put the links on the show notes for this episode. You can find that at iamsaltlake.com/195. Hey, there's some ways you can support the podcast. Any support is much appreciated. First and foremost, make sure you subscribe. That way you don't miss a single episode. It's free to subscribe to this podcast. It'll get sent directly to your whatever app you listen to podcasts in. Make sure you subscribe. Also, share any of your favorite episodes with your family and friends on Facebook or Twitter, and help spread the word out. Also, go to iamsaltlake.com and click the donate button. Donate $1 or $2. Helps keep the podcast moving forward. Helps with any of the projects I have going on. Doing a podcast costs a lot of money, And so through your financial help, I'll be able to kind of help keep it moving forward. You can also become a monthly donor. All of that is at iamsaltlake.com. Also, drop me an email. I'd love to know what you think of the show in general. Again, my email address is iamsaltlake@gmail.com. And tell me what you're thinking of the episodes. You know, I'm slowly reaching 200 episodes. So I've been putting out quite a bit of content, and I'd love to know your thoughts about that. So for myself and Charles the Sphinx, we'll catch you guys again next time.